When I was growing up in central Minnesota, in the farm country there, I um, I remember that it was common practice on the dairy farms where I lived, that at the first sign of a blizzard, which was common when I was growing up there, that the farmers would gather all of the cows into the barns, and then they would string a rope from the barn door back to their house. And that way, even if there was a whiteout in the middle of the blizzard, they could get to the barn and back by holding on to that rope, right? Because as children, we had heard lots of stories about farmers who actually left their houses, tried to get to the barn to start the milking, and would be lost in the storm, just in their own backyards. I want to read you a quote from A Life of One's Own by Marian Milner. I had at least begun to guess that my greatest need might be to let go and be free from the drive after achievement, if only I dared. I had also guessed that perhaps when I had let these go, then I might be free to become aware of some other purpose that was more fundamental, not self-imposed private ambitions, but something that grew out of the essence of one's own nature. People said, oh, be yourself at all costs. But I had found that it was not so easy to know just what oneself was. It was far easier to want what other people seemed to want, and then imagine that the choice was one's own. It was only when I was actively passive and content to wait and watch that I even knew what I wanted. And here's another quote from Leonard Cohen's song, The Future. The blizzard of the world has crossed the threshold, and it has overturned the order of the soul. I thought about that song as I was thinking about images to talk about this morning, and the image of the rope going from the house to the barn door was the first thing that came to me. Because as I think about what it means to live an intentional life, an undivided life, Parker Palmer calls it, I think about how easy it is in our daily lives to let go of that rope and get lost in the blizzard. We live in all kinds of different blizzards these days. They swirl around us in the forms of YouTube videos and Facebook posts and fake news of all kinds. And so there's a blizzard of information. It's so easy to get lost in the midst of all that and forget what the principles are that hold us steady on a daily basis. And particularly now when we live in such a postmodern world where there doesn't seem to be any kind of shame or repercussions from telling untruths, right? I talk to people all the time who have a difficult time talking to other people with different political persuasions, different cultural values, because there doesn't seem to be a common rope that we all hold on to that can lead us to where we need to be going. I'm going to apologize because some of you may know I've been suffering from COVID-19 this week. And even though I feel like I'm healing up and I've been fully vaccinated and boosted, I still have a little bit of congestion. And as soon as I start talking, I start to cough. So if I start to cough, please excuse me. Or if I start to lose my voice, I apologize. And as I thought about this intentional life, this rope that we all need to hold on to, or that we try to hold on to get us to where we need to go, I was reminded of a conversation I had several years ago with the mother of one of our teenagers in a UU congregation I was a part of at the time. And she told the story about how her daughter was looking for a summer job, and she had applied to work as a counselor at a camp nearby, a summer camp nearby. But during the interview that she had with the people at the camp, it became really clear to her that they didn't necessarily share the same values. The camp was very deeply Christian, and the counselors were expected to subscribe to that faith tradition and as well to pass on that perspective to their campers. And she told them, quite honestly, that she just didn't feel comfortable in that role. So they asked her, well, what do you believe? I believe each person is important, she said. I think we need to be kind to each other so we can listen well and learn from each other so that together we can search together for what is true. It's important that all people have a voice. I believe that we need to work together to build a fair and peaceful world. And I also believe that it's important for us to care for the earth. And when she said this, the interviewer said, I don't think I've ever met someone your age who is so spiritually intact, but we can't hire you as a summer counselor. I was really proud of that young woman for choosing to be honest and to live with integrity instead of being successful during that job interview. Now, some of you may recognize those words, and I wrote them down when her mother told them to me because I wanted to remember them. Some of you may recognize that her words are a paraphrase of our Unitarian Universalist 7 principles, right? In terms of our common life together, these principles are a really very fine rope that we can all hold on to when we are facing the blizzard of our lives. They are part of the tradition of Unitarian Universalism, principles that we can always return to when we disagree about the kind of culture that we're trying to communicate to others or that we're trying to create together as a community. There are a couple of, I hold these principles very, very dear, and I come back to them all the time as part of my rope. And I want to tell you about another set of principles that I hold on to as I'm working with people who come from both conservative and liberal traditions, either culturally or religiously. And that is that the words of Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who once said that the central conservative truth is that culture matters most. And the central liberal truth is that politics can change culture whenever culture is found to be unjust or immoral. And I hold on to those two truths together and wonder sometimes if, in terms of the importance of those two statements and the recognition that we as people of faith have a responsibility toward moral culture and just culture, if we could if we could find common ground on which to talk about what is moral and just and what changes need to happen. And also recognize that, yes, culture is a very important thing to maintain, just like our principles are an important part of our culture to maintain. This morning, as we consider what it means to live a life of intention, I wanted to first bring up intentions as a common life, as a public life. But I also want to shift our gaze away from community ethics a little bit today to talk about a more personal way in which each one of us can cease to be true to our own individual natures. For that too can get lost in the blizzard of our lives through expectations of others, through not paying attention to our own leanings and desires. In his book, A Hidden Wholeness, Parker Palmer writes that he writes about what he calls the divided life, one that is not being intentionally lived. And he says that there are 3 different ways that we can identify when we are actually leading a divided life and not a life of wholeness. These are the ways that we can pay attention to when we might be leading a divided life. We lead a divided life, he writes, when we refuse to invest ourselves in our work, when we let its quality be diminished, when we are no longer passionate about it, and begin to distance ourselves from those it is meant to serve. We live in divided life, he says, when we remain in settings or relationships that steadily kill off our spirits. And we're living a divided life when we find that we have to start hiding those beliefs that we hold dear from those we disagree with in order to avoid conflict or personal challenge or change. Or when we have to conceal our true identities for fear of being criticized or shamed. It is so easy to get lost in those blizzards and let go of our individual rope. We often ignore the signs that we get along the way that tell us that we may be living a divided life. And I wonder why this is so true. In any culture, in any religious tradition, really, there are principles that serve as our guideposts for actions that shape our hopes, shape our aspirations, our ideas, shape our will, our purpose. These often exist as principles, like they do for us, as commandments, as laws, as covenants, as doctrines. In metaphysical terms, these are considered the masculine or yang energies that drive our actions, that drive our religious institutions. Our 7 principles, for instance, and our emphasis on social justice action can be thought of as the yang energies of our particular Unitarian Universalist tradition. But then there's the feminine or yin energy of any religious tradition. And those are more difficult to talk about They're less obvious, but they happen in every faith tradition and every culture. These are energies that are more receptive, not action-driven, but focused on what we receive, what we're paying attention to. They include those magical little sparks of intuition and insight that we receive during our prayers, during meditation, during walks in the woods, or while we're taking a shower, through our dreams, or moments of synchronicity or coincidence. Most wisdom traditions will tell us that we need to pay attention to these magical little sparks. And this kind of yin passive energy that results in these little sparks of imagination are what one of my mentors, Joyce Rockwood Hudson, calls natural spirituality. Natural spirituality. And I call this paying attention, listening for the spirit. It's a gift that we all have as human beings. And I would love to see us focus more on this kind of yin energy, because it is one of the things that, because we all have this as human beings, we all have this gift. It is something that unites us across cultures, across religious traditions, across political persuasions, across nations. And yet natural spirituality, I think, is also best thought of as a companion to the more yang energies of religious traditions that create the boundaries through their covenants, through their principles, through their doctrines. They create the boundaries for our spiritual intuitions. So when it comes to living an intentional or an undivided life, these magical sparks become important to pay attention to, because natural spirituality makes room for each one of us as unique individuals. There are tools that we can use to develop our receptivity to these little divine sparks in order to strengthen our spiritual lives. Just beginning a meditation with the words, "Guide me today," or beginning a prayer by saying, I've lost sight of the rope again, bring me back. We can begin to notice a sense of direction. Or writing down our dreams the first thing in the morning, or paying attention to the ways in which coincidences shape our lives also helps. There are other tools that are specific to our personalities, and two tools that I use most often include the Enneagram, which is an ancient tool that's become popular over the last 10 or 20 years, and the Myers-Briggs type indicator. The Enneagram is based on the principle that each one of us is born whole, but then we become a little bit broken in our early life because we mistakenly hear an unhealthy message about how we're not just quite right, and that we spend the rest of our lives trying to heal that sense of brokenness. There are 9 different messages, so 9 different types in the Enneagram. And that incorrect message that we inadvertently hear when we're young shapes our lives, and learning how to deal with that can lead to more wholeness. The Myers-Briggs which was first described by Carl Jung, is probably more familiar to most of you. But one of the important parts of Jung's original theory about the personality types are four archetypes, he calls them. Various people call these different archetypes different things. I tend to refer to them as the wisdom seeker, the nest builder or home builder, the community leader, and the entrepreneur. Depending on what our Myers-Briggs type is, each of these archetypes takes on different emphasis at different times in our lives. We may think that there's a normal sequence, but depending on our type, each of these archetypes takes on a more important role in different times of our lives. Carl Jung said that we can expect a big change in perspective every 20 or 25 years in our lives, and that one of these archetypes will take on much more important as our lives shift and change. I think the main thing he was trying to get at by talking about these four different archetypes is to give us the information that we tend to think of our lives as being on a onward and upward forever trajectory, but instead, when we're seeking wholeness, we're trying to pay attention to these four archetypes in our lives and shift and change over our lives. There might be cultural expectations that we go through these archetypes in a general way, but our individual Myers-Briggs type tell us differently, that different ones will be more influential in our lives in different times. And when I first started writing these notes for this message, I thought I was going to be able to be more specific about what different Myers-Briggs types will tell you about the trajectory of your life and what brings you to wholeness. And then I realized that in the amount of time that we have, that's just not possible. So if you are really interested in this, in how the trajectory of your life might be shaped by your Myers-Briggs type, I'm going to invite you to email me. I'm going to share my email address in the chat after the sermon. And just shoot me an email and let me know what your Myers-Briggs type is, and we'll have a conversation about that. But for this morning, I think the message that I want to get across to you is that it's important to reclaim, I think, some of these tools and some of the more mystical aspects of our religious lives, and that there is a divine wisdom at the heart of natural life that is consistently trying to get our attention. It doesn't matter if we call that essence God, Allah, divine wisdom, universal love, higher power, the force. None of that matters, but what matters is our attention to staying in connection with it. And we can use tools and develop practices that foster the kind of active listening that can lead to spiritual growth and spiritual opening if we pay attention to this yin energy that's available to us. Now you might ask, why does any of this matter? Why would we want to seek wholeness through spiritual practices like the ones I've just described? I think it matters a great deal because living a divided life will eventually cause you some pain. living a divided life, when you are living a life that is divided from your most deeply held ideas about yourself, if it goes on long enough, the self you're trying to hide from others will disappear even from your own view. And when that happens, your uniqueness, your unique energy, unique passion, your unique dreams cannot illuminate the world. And you will prevent others from seeing the world in a new way that only you can see. And I also think it's important that people who are close to you, if you are living a divided life, will begin to catch a glimpse of the gap between who you are pretending to be and who you actually are. And then there's a certain wariness that develops between the two of you that becomes a barrier to an intimate relationship. And then you find that the people who could really help you be your authentic self, who could really help you live an intentional life, will begin to disappear because of that wariness. So I think it is important to develop not just the yang energy of our spiritual tradition, but the yin energy of receptivity and listening and spiritual growth. So my hope for all of you in this new year, as we think about what it might mean to live more intentionally, is that you have the courage to tell and then to live into your unique and precious story, your unique life. Because somewhere someone will listen to what you have to say, to your story, and they will decide to fight for their own. They will decide to love more deeply. They will decide not to compromise. And someone else will decide to take the risk they need to take to live a more intentional life. This is my hope for each of you in this new year. May it be so, and blessed be.